Hello, community members. Welcome. My name is Antoine Craigwell, and we're about to start the first lead up to our In My Mind 2026 conference that's scheduled for October 8th here in New York City at the LGBTQ Center on West 13th Street. This year's conference is specifically focused on climate change and the ways that it impacts our mental health, particularly looking at the ways that LGBT, Black, and people of color communities are impacted. Today, our online panel discussion will hear from voices in the Global South. Right now, we've got online with us Christie, Ph.D., who is from Jamaica and also here in the US. We've got Sherlina Nageer, or Lina Free as she prefers to be called, who is from Guyana. And we're expecting Pinty Dludlu from the Kingdom of Eswatini. They're about 7 hours ahead of us. And Joleen Mataele from the Kingdom of Tonga in the Pacific, and she's about 12 to 14 hours ahead of us. So we are waiting for them to join, and when they do join, then they can be part of the conversation. This entire panel discussion is being moderated by one of our good friends, 5-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Derick, who will talk to you about himself. He will tell you about who he is and his origins and where he comes from and his background and why he's part of this whole conversation. But he will also he has roots in Panama and here in the US. So there is a significant global aspect to what we are doing and what the In My Mind conference is about. But more importantly, community members, is that we're focusing on climate change, because one of the fundamental aspects that requires a paradigm shift when we start thinking about mental health is to move away from the Western, European, and American construct that mental health is singular and is individual. Rather, to understand that our mental health is significantly affected by everything that goes on in our immediate external environment. And when our climate becomes difficult to endure or to survive, our mental health suffers the effects of that. As the climatologist Anderson, in a paper that he wrote in 1989, specifically said that when external atmospheric temperatures increase, we will likely see greater frequency and increasing in domestic violence, anger outbursts, and irritations. And so we react when the external temperature gets hot. But before we begin today's discussion, there are a couple of ground things we want to make sure that we all can get to experience this properly. We're asking you to please turn off your videos, your cameras, and mute your microphones. If you have a question, put the question in the chat, and we will seek to address questions at the end of the panel discussion. Any comments or thoughts or concerns, we ask you to put them in the chat. Towards the end of the panel discussion, we will have a QR code for you to scan with your phones and to complete a brief evaluation telling us what you thought about the entire discussion, whether it met our objectives, whether it satisfied your curiosity, whether you were more informed. How do you feel about it? Okay? And so now I would like to turn this over to my good friend, 5-time Emmy Award-winning journalist, Derick. Derick, over to you.
Thank you. Please say that again one more time with the five time. Yeah, just kidding. I appreciate you having me, and I'm looking forward to this conversation because I think that the four panelists we have today offer quite unique perspectives, and I look forward to learning just as much from them as the rest of the audience here. Again, my name's Derick Waller, and people in New York know me very well from being a TV reporter. I worked for ABC 7 here in New York for many years, as well as the CBS station Channel 2 as well. So, and now I'm an independent journalist and media consultant, and really excited to continue doing some work in the journalism space. About me, my background, I grew up in Virginia, and I grew up in an African American household. And so people always look at me and are a little confused as to my background, but I'm mixed race. My mother's African American, and my father, who raised me, is also black, but my biological father, I actually don't know who that is. So I believe he's white, but that's the short version of a much more complicated background. But I'm an openly gay man here in New York City, and proud member of the LGBTQIA plus community. So. Without further ado, I would love to get our panelists to introduce themselves because I'm here to moderate this discussion and kind of guide the conversation. But really, what we're going to learn a lot from the four people we have today. And so, Antoine did mention who we have here, but let's just go. Lina mentioned going in alphabetical order, which benefits her very well. If you don't want to go first, so let's. Let's start with, do we have M? Let's start with you, Mr. Christie, or excuse me, I apologize. But M, go ahead.
Thank you, Derick. Hi, everyone. Welcome and thank you again, Antoine, for including me in this conversation. So I'm Christie. I'm a Jamaican born and raised transplant here in Syracuse, New York. I moved here to do my PhD, which I completed last year in environmental science. I have a personal academic and professional interest in governance processes and how they include or not include marginalized peoples. And my focus to this end is on LGBTQ peoples primarily and Indigenous Jamaicans within the realm of climate change and land conflicts. And because of my work here in Syracuse, I'm now recently focusing on youth experiences with environmental field broadly. So I come to this conversation from, one, being a member of the LGBTQ community, growing up in Jamaica and seeing or experiencing what it's like, but then also realizing that in working in a climate change disaster risk space, there was no conversations about LGBTQ people who at the time were experiencing very high levels of homelessness. And so we decided that it was important to sort of build out our own research program in Jamaica about how we LGBTQ people contend with climate change and disaster scenarios. So I hope to share more about that within the context of community and resilience and how we can grow together as a community in the face of disaster. Thank you.
And so, Antoine, I do want to ask you, do you want me to kind of introduce everyone first and then kind of throw questions out, or perhaps I should throw some questions toward M while he has the floor? What do you think about that?
I think you should probably just go ahead and introduce each person because when you start asking the questions and you develop a flow, then it all just
Yeah, that makes
continues.
sense.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay, well then let's go down the line. Is Pinty with us?
probably not. I
Probably not.
don't know.
Okay. That's okay. Let's okay. How about Joleen?
I don't know yet
Oh,
because it's like about 4 o'clock in the morning their time.
well,
Good morning. I'm here.
Oh, welcome, welcome.
It's actually 5 o'clock in the morning now,
oof.
but I've been up since 4 o'clock.
Welcome.
Well,
And
good
Pinty is here
morning.
too.
Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, Jolene, would you like to tell us a little more about yourself? I know that are you in Tonga right now?
Yes, I'm currently
Oh,
in Tonga in the beautiful island of Tonga, or the Kingdom of Tonga, not the Queendom. I'm a trans mother of 3 beautiful children and 5 grandchildren, co-founder and executive director of the Tonga Ladies Association, the only LGBT network in Tonga and the longest LGBTIQ organizations that has been established in the Pacific since 1992. I think that's enough for me, and you're going to hear about me later on in the work that I do. Thank you.
Is Pinty here?
Yes, hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. My name is Pinty from the Kingdom of Eswatini. I actually work with Transwati, which is a trans-Pacific and trans-led organization. Oh, my camera is off. So should I switch on? Should I switch on my camera?
If you think you're able to, you can switch on your camera, but we are asking everybody else except the panelists to keep their cameras on so that everybody can see them. But everybody who's joining, turn your cameras off, please.
Okay, all right, thank you. So yes, I'm from the Kingdom of Eswatini. I do trans activism, I do trans work. It's a country that actually doesn't put any recognition or puts any restrictions, but doesn't actually recognize trans people. But then in the course of the work, I think that the hardest is being part of the trans community and the queer community here, because we get a lot of backlash, we get a lot of programmatic activities don't come towards trans people because they just want to lump everyone under MSM for their own benefits. So yeah, and I just hope currently you have heard that His Majesty was speaking publicly that there won't be any recognition of trans people in the country. So our work is just to advocate and advance trans activism, advocate for service access, especially public access services, and to make sure that we have a community of trans people that can access all services without any discrimination whatsoever. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And Lina, you're next.
Thanks, everyone. Hope you can hear me. So my name is Sherlina or Lina. I am a queer ecofeminist from Guyana. My academic training is in the sciences, so biology and health. And so I work on a variety of issues from an intersectional and holistic lens. So using justice as the framework. So a lot of my work has focused on sexual and reproductive health and rights, gender justice, and environmental justice. So I co-founded an organization called the Green Heart Movement in 2021. And we work specifically in Guyana to raise awareness of environmental issues, advocacy, community building, that sort of thing. I'll talk about that later.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for those introductions. And, we had a conversation a few days ago preparing for this where I believe it was said that, with the climate change that we're experiencing worldwide, the LGBTQIA plus community experiences it even at a greater level because we are a marginalized community. And so I thought that really stood out to me. And so that brings me to Emme, because I know that you've been doing quite a bit of research on this. You mentioned that there was a focus group that you put together. Can you talk a little bit more about the research that you've done about how climate change is impacting the LGBTQ community, and what findings have you come up with?
Oh, jumping right in. Sure. Thank you. So this work started in 2021. When I was asked by Jamaica Forum for Lesbian, Allsexuals and Gays, or as they're known now, Equality for All Foundation in Jamaica, to do a study on climate change and the community, as we call it, the LGBTQ community. And there was no precedent for that anywhere. There's a lot of work out there in academic literature on post-disaster experiences of queer people, primarily in Australia, for example. Some stuff in the US following Hurricane Katrina, which is highly regarded as the springboard for this kind of conversation. And so we had no precedent for doing that work because nobody had collected primary empirical data on those experiences. So we did this study, and what we found was that LGBTQ people were at least twice as vulnerable as non-LGBTQ people when it comes down to climate change. And subsequently, there has been studies in the US that has confirmed that for the US as well. So we're seeing an uptick in data collection in this regard. Now, the focus group that you mentioned, the more recent study that I'm actually wading through all that data right now to make sense of it, that was done in 2023. I think it was actually supposed to be my dissertation, but never actually made it because of time. So we're working on that now. And what we set out to do at that point was to get the first-hand account of the LGBTQ experience with climate change in Jamaica. Because in addition to the lack of data globally, what we also have is a lot of researchers tend to assume a lot of things about how we are experiencing climate change and disasters, or what we know or think or about these things. And so I wanted to make sure that the voice of the community was represented in what I was doing. So we went back and we talked to them. And what we found was that LGBTQ people, contrary to popular belief, they know a lot about climate change and they are interested in knowing more. They are interested in being engaged in climate change spaces because they recognize their vulnerability. And that is the other side of a coin that suggests that they don't see climate change impacts as something, what's the word I'm looking for here? Their experiences are not inherently unique, right, to the community. So there are a lot of through lines that LGBTQ members can draw with other marginalized groups, but the difference is that we are not mentioned in climate change policy. We are not mentioned in disaster frameworks, right? We see mentions of disability. We see mention of women and girls. We see mention of poor people, farmers, rural people, elderly, but we don't see mention of LGBTQ peoples. And so that was kind of the challenge there. So they know a lot, they want to be engaged, and they have ideas about what it would take for them to become resilient. So we saw everything from suggestions for community level organization, for example, co-op, developing co-ops for sharing food, for housing if someone gets displaced. This idea of moving from an individualistic ideology and moving towards being community-centric in how we are as a community. There are ideas about organization level interventions, for example, technical training and skills development. People want to be trained as phlebotomists, as emergency medical responders. So when these things come up, the community can respond within the community, right? So we can more or less circumvent all the discrimination and stigma and the lack of resources that would be poured into the LGBTQ community post-disaster.
Can I ask you one question about
Yeah.
your research? Because you mentioned LGBTQ people twice as likely to face impacts. Can you give some examples of what that might look like?
Sure. One of the most prominent examples is the ability to relocate, as in preparation for a disaster or even during a disaster. And one of the metrics that people use for that is whether or not they have access to transportation. For example, owning a vehicle is an easy example here. That is linked to income and employment, which is linked to educational attainment. So we see a direct through line between access to education, access to jobs, access to income, and their ability and LGBTQ people's ability to relocate in preparation for or during a disaster.
Wow, I find that I find that fascinating. And I do want to say that any of the other panelists, if you have questions that you think of while people are talking, please feel free to jump in. Does anyone have any questions for Em so
Yes,
far?
please, because I will ramble on about this.
Lina, I know you have something to say.
Why you put it against brother? Yes. I don't have a question, but it is a reflection on what Em just shared, which is a lot. And so a couple of points that I want to make. So climate change has been going on forever. The climate is always changing. So it's what we're seeing right now is a crisis in terms of multiple things that are being out of balance, right? So I say climate crisis, not just me, other people too. And it's actually a poly crisis, poly meaning plural. So there are multiple crises that we are experiencing simultaneously. As queer, LGBTI plus people, we're used to crisis and to living precariously on the margins, right? And so in a way, we know how to survive. A resilience is like you have to be resilient as a queer person in this world to survive. So I feel like we have maybe special skills. Maybe we have a superpower there to tap into. That's how I like to frame it. But yeah, so it's multiple crises at the same time. And so the Em talked specifically about disasters, and I know a lot of people experience that in terms of earthquakes and hurricanes, flooding, drought, those kinds of things. The point I like to tell people, or the point I like people to get, is that even without a disaster type event, daily life is challenging because of the climate crisis, right? So I speak from a Guyana context. We don't experience hurricanes and earthquakes, thankfully, because we are part of the continent of South America. We're not an island in the ocean or the sea, which is more vulnerable. But we are a country that's below sea level. So we do get a lot of flooding on a regular basis. And when it's hotter than normal, rainfall is affected, so agricultural production is affected, so farms and the produce. And so when we go to market, the prices of fruits and vegetables, for example, that is my marker in a way of climate impact. And so I can talk more about that too,
Yeah,
but
because you had some interesting. There was an article I read. I was doing my research about you, and you went to the market, and was it garlic? Was it
tomato.
garlic that was tomatoes? Okay, something like that. Okay, some something that grows, and the price was so much higher because of the drought. Was that right?
Yeah, tomatoes, which it's a kind of a basic for me in most of my cooking. But it's all vegetables and fruits, and it's kind of the prices, they also cycle. But that's a marker for me, like when certain things are a certain price, and these are things that are grown locally. We're not necessarily talking about imported. So there are a lot of levels to this. There's an issue now with the US war against Iran, which is blocking ships that carry fertilizer through the Strait of Hormuz. So globally, farmers who use fertilizer for large-scale agriculture aren't getting fertilizer. So their crops are failing, and the prices of available crops are going up. And we have a very interconnected system now. So things that from India go to end up in the supermarkets in the US and around the world, China. And so there is there's a lot of connection, and that is things. So the climate, what goes on in another part of the world, affects us wherever we are all the time in many different ways.
And I think that's a great point, that a lot of these issues do acutely affect our community, but they are broader issues that really impact everybody, and perhaps our community just a little bit more because of the marginalization. And so I think that's a great point. I do want to add to everyone who's in the room and listening, that if you would like to ask a question, I think a really good opportunity would be to put it in the chat if you have that ability. Oh, and I think there's 17. Well, let me actually learn how to use this thing. But yes, if you okay, yeah, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat. I'm sorry, I was just catching up on some things because I was not in the right window. Anyways, I would like to talk to Joleen, because I find your history quite fascinating. You're a pioneer in trans advocacy in a place that is, I think it's accurate to say, one of the most difficult places in the world to be openly trans. Is that a fair statement?
Thank you, Derick. And I think my comment will be in line with what the last two speakers had, with Lina and Emme, because the work for the Tonga Ladies Association and broader Pacific SOGI's sexual orientation, gender identity, and expressions communities, the one truth about often deeply lived, but how should I put it, is overlooked by outsiders, is that environmental justice is a prerequisite for mental health, especially when it comes to times of crisis. Say, in the Pacific context, mental health and well-being is inseparable from land and kinship, because SOGI's people are often the most vulnerable during climate disasters. Community-led power is the only force capable for breaching the gap between survival and mental stability. Some of the key interconnections understood by the community safety as a foundation for mental health is not just the absence of the illness, by the presence of dignity and freedom. From discrimination for the ladies. And please excuse me if you keep hearing me saying ladies. It's the word that we use for LGBTIQ people in Tonga. It came from a word called whakaleiti, but please, whakaleiti means like a lady. It was brought in by a researcher in the late or the early 70s, late 70s, early 80s, from the UK, and it means whakaleiti means like a lady. The word that we actually grew up with was whakawhawhine or whakawhiwhine. So when we started the Tonga Ladies Association, part of these transition and part of this the work that we did was trying to understand the identity and sexual orientation of every single person, and it links to when we talk about these gender identities and all that, everything in Tonga. The reason why we took the FAKA part is because In Tonga, it's whaka this, whaka that, whaka this, whaka that. You know, everything is, but it's more it's an introduction of a formal word. You know, and please don't think that I'm swearing at you if I say anything like that. So, so the
I'm glad you said it.
and it, you know, and it's part of the things that we try and when it comes to mental health, it's not just the absence illness, you know, of illness, but the presence of dignity and freedom from discrimination, and that's the reason why we took that out. For the latest climate events like the last cyclone Gita, you know, don't just destroy homes and destroy our safe houses that provide the psychological grounding necessary for community resilience. However, the community power of disaster response, because of the mainstream disaster relief, can sometimes be exclusionary or even retributive, that the TLA and the similar groups must build our own, you know, power through programs like the climate justice activities, like the life skills activities, whether it's in cooking, whether it's in floral arrangements, sewing, designing, you know, and in all fields that can energize and be a source of income or resource for our members, eh? And this community power manifested through water security projects and life skills programs, inclusive emergency shelter training, directly mitigates the trauma of being left behind. The threat multiplier of marginalization, like climate change, acts as a threat multiplier for existing inequalities, food insecurity and displacement, and disproportionately impacts marginalized groups, leading to acute mental distress, anxiety, and depressions. As you all know, you know, when we get funds, when we get help from international that comes into directly to the government, we are not even, our organization or our safe house do not get the direct help. We have to go through quite a lot of like families that are actually within the government to try and get the government to deliver food, any kind of supply, you know, otherwise it will all come back to our own pocket. And that is the reason why we actually, after the second, after Cyclone Gita, when we had to do the GoFundMe to rebuild the office and the safe house, we decided that we will take our own money from a little money that came out of our Miss Galaxy pageant, which Miss Galaxy became the actual funding stream for the work that we did, and this is the trans pageant, and this pageant has become the biggest event here in Tonga, and it has brought quite a lot of media, people from overseas, and you know, from all walks of life, to you know, to Tonga, and it has resourced and given and resourced the Tonga Ladies Association, and not only that, but it has given us the opportunity to award 82 scholarships to all our school dropouts, and also help out with the running of the office.
Great. Can I jump in real fast? I'd love to ask
I'll
you.
stay there.
I just want to ask you, you know, you talk so much about mental health. How do you how do you cope, and how do you protect your own mental health in a place that's so hostile to your whole identity?
I grew up in a family of 42 children. My father married 3 times, and of course, apart from that, he had other children, and then he adopted other children. You know, we adopted other children too. Family, of course, and I was number 10 of the first marriage. But I grew up not knowing my mother because she died when I was 5 months old, and I was raised by my grandparents. So living as a trans person and in having to deal with my own mental health, you know, I grew up in a family that loved music. And there was always music everywhere. That's how I became a singer, you know, entertainer. So my mental health, when it comes to with all the trouble and everything that's happening in my life, I sit down and I sing to myself, right? And when I started raising children, I think my grandchildren gave me a sense of hope. But at the same time, with the prayers and fasting and everything, I've been able to live a life that I'm really, you know, that I've enjoyed and still enjoying up to today. I'm 62 years old and I'm still loving the life that I have and enjoying, you know, all the struggles that I've been through. I treat my enemies as my friends. I don't hate anybody. And I hate dealing with, you know, with stress. Because every single time I'm stressed out, I'll grab a bottle of wine, call a cousin, let's go and have a drink. Let's go and celebrate life. Because tomorrow I can deal with all the troubles and I'll go and sing karaoke somewhere or I'll sing to myself. But it's, you know, it's been it's something that I've learned to you know, since leaving, because I left school when I was 15 years old and when I was 14 years old, and I had never been back to school since then, never been back to the classroom until I went into all these other trainings, small courses and everything, and you know, to help out with the work that I do. But I've always treated life as something very precious. I don't dwell in the past. I don't dwell in the troubles. I deal with the trouble and then I move away. Right. So
thank you. I really appreciate you sharing that. Pinty, are you with us? Okay, we'll come back. Maybe Pinty stepped away for a second. I do want to recognize the fact that we have a journalist who's with us, a fellow journalist, not just me, but Matthew. And I don't want to brutalize your last name, but I don't. If you're able to, if you can turn on your microphone or your camera even as well, you post a great question in here, and I would love if you would like to ask the question yourself. I think that might be interesting. Matthew is with the. I've always messed up this. Is it Medill? Is it Medill News Service? I should know how to say that correctly. But Matthew, hi. Am I saying am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, it's Medill.
Okay. That's embarrassing. I'm glad I said it correctly. Please introduce yourself and ask your question, because I know you're actually writing a piece about this.
Yeah, so my name is Matthew Drinkrosky. I am a graduate student here in Washington, D.C. with Northwestern University. And I mostly focus on social justice issues. I'm moving towards really focusing on the LGBTQ plus community specifically. And I got really interested in this meeting just because as a member of the community myself, I know just how many things we have to really deal with. And specifically, this is such a massive issue that's not easily dealt with, that I'm really curious, like what kind of work is being done to really highlight these issues and help ease some of the struggles that our community has to deal with in these places where they might not be legally represented or otherwise supported, I guess. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone want to tackle that?
Sorry, Matthew, my internet kept cutting off. Can you repeat that question? Sorry.
Oh, yes, of course. Basically, I'm wondering, like, what sort of work is being done to ease some of the pressures on our community in places where they're not legally represented or supported in facing like climate change and things?
And I think you all have something to add on that because you all live in countries where our identity is under attack. And so how do we advocate for ourselves and create change is, I think, the root of that question.
So I can attempt to offer something here. Thank you, Matthew, for the question, and happy to have you here. So I work alongside LGBTQ advocacy and environmental advocacy organizations in Jamaica. And by alongside, I mean ever so often they ask me to work on something with them or for them. And so most of the work I do, it's quite different from how the other panelists approach this issue. Because for me, I think or policymakers love to say, they're making data-driven decisions. And where data doesn't exist, their decisions can't be made, right? And so for LGBTQ peoples, this is what some people would call data injustice. We don't exist in the data set, and so decisions that are made often exclude our experiences. So that's a starting point. The work I do, I think, is important to addressing that specific issue, right? So whereas the internal community work is important, the data policy side of the work also has to be done in order to get that high level, not high level support, but definitely to get high level decisions made in service of our issues. So that's one side of it. The other side of it is when we have very different landscapes for LGBTQ experiences between the US and Jamaica, Guyana, Tonga. And oftentimes we tend to approach these conversations with a sort of prefigurative idea that there is a solution, but there are many solutions to this. And it starts with understanding what is the landscape we're operating in. So for example, the US, despite my own conscious choice to move here, is one of few countries, well, not one of few, but one of the countries with the most prominent attacks on the LGBTQ community, right? When you juxtapose that against a country like Jamaica, for example, which is renowned as the most homophobic country, you start to ask questions. For example, it's not illegal to be gay in Jamaica. However, we do have laws that have sort of bloomed into this culture of homophobia that we're reeling with, and our politicians have no desire to address that issue legally, or within the remit of parliamentary decision making. But at the same time, our LGBTQ experience in Jamaica is not one of being hunted, quote unquote, by our government. And so we have these different through lines of LGBTQ experience where, in the one hand, it's sort of passive because the government, the legal landscape itself doesn't prevent us from being queer, but it doesn't enable us to be our full selves. And so LGBTQ peoples in Jamaica, for example, overwhelmingly think we can't achieve our full potential or meet our goals by remaining in Jamaica. Whereas in the US, we have all these legal barriers. For example, if you follow the ACLU, for example, since 2020 and before, there has been no less than 500 bills that have sought to reduce the rights and privileges of the LGBTQ community. No less than 500 per year. And so it's important for us to first understand what we're working with. And so whereas I know Lina and Joleen and Pinty might have solutions because they're doing that level, that community level work, I also think from the higher order legal policy landscape, I'd like to offer that we have to get this conversation on the docket, and it has to stay on the docket in our decision-making spaces. At the same time, we're lifting the community up and developing community-centered resilience through that sort of internal, local level grassroots action.
And I want to add that I think that what draws me to you so much is the research and the data that you're digging into. And as a journalist, I mean that's really interesting to me because that's we think of like what is the news here, and I really appreciate you sharing that insight and activism that's rooted in facts and data. I think is much more powerful than just someone's opinion. So I appreciate the work that you're doing. I do want to move to another question, and this is from Khalil. And I'll do this again. Khalil, if you'd like to ask your question, please go ahead and turn on, and you can do that. But if not, that's okay too. But Khalil is a student in Syracuse, born and raised in Northeast India, and he's doing they are doing a PhD at State University of New York, SUNY, focusing on the impacts of climate change induced disasters. And Khalil, hello. Please ask your
Hello.
question to the panelists.
Hello, Derick, and all the panelists. And it has been so nice to see so many people of colors in this panel and also in the members who have joined. That's a rare moment for me because I have been working or actually researching on this topic for more than 3 years now. And mostly I see non-colored faces so far. So it's again, I'm saying taking up the space is the first way to go. I believe in it in this kind of crisis. Also, I'm a friend and colleague of M. Just wanted to say. I was thinking like listening from all of you, how do you imagine a safe space would be? I'm a dreamer and I dream of utopia, even when probably I'm facing some kind of disaster crisis from the environment. Also, even if like other kind of disasters that Em has just talked about in this country where I am studying right now. So I just want to pick your brain. Like, how do you imagine what a safe space look like for these communities? When there is a crisis coming up, like disaster crisis, I'm talking about. Thank you.
I was thinking, Joleen, maybe you
Can I
want to,
come in?
or hey, Pinty's here. Hello, or whoever would like to
Yes.
tackle it. Go right ahead.
Okay. Okay, thank you for the question. I think my imagination of a safe space would be a space where the queer community or trans community or LGBTIQ people are able to be a part of any emergencies that happens when we come to rescue, to saying we are bringing in emergency care for everyone, and it also encompasses the queer community. Because, for instance, in my space, I'll make an example. During the COVID period, there were food parcels being distributed through the National Disaster Task, but those food parcels were never reaching to the queer community because it is hard to be reached out by the traditional or leaders in communities because you are a minority community that's not recognized in society. So for you to go out there or be picked, it's like for them, it's kind of a waste of resources because you are something or you are a person that's not being recognized by society. And then on the other end, in our setting, the reason we have floods, climate change, the scorching sun, it's associated with part of it being queer people and their practices. It's not like just something natural or being forced by chemical reactions, but you are taken as the result of that's a result of us being queer people existing and the practices. That is how they take it. So I would imagine a space where we just are responsible as citizens for what is happening around us and take action to cap that without even pushing blame to say, oh, because queer people exist in our spaces, that is why the sun is so hot, that is why we no longer have rains. It's considered taboo in my country because you have seen somebody trans, a trans woman in the space, it's taboo for you to see those people. Therefore, that is why the ancestors in our communities are said to be sad or angry at us. That is why we won't receive enough rains, or we would receive more rains than necessary, that it eventually gets to floods and all the stuff. So it's kind of considered a shift towards trans people, queer people, to say they are the reason we have all these disasters that are happening. It's because they are not conforming to what nature is asking for. So in my opinion, in a space where I would imagine a space where we just live without any prejudice, we have people accessing services, we have people being able to fully live, practice their rights fully, going to school without any prejudice, going to universities, because at some point in time it can be difficult for queer people to even go for scholarships, especially trans people, for scholarship interviews, because the thing is, you get there, you have these incongruous documents. It's kind of not speaking to the person they are speaking to. But then you find that can be easy for perhaps a lesbian woman or a gay man because they just have kind of matching documentation versus who they present as. So that's what I can say with us. It's an issue of just considering that national disasters are there, natural disasters exist with or without queer people, they'll always be there. For us as a nation, it would be an issue of how do we take charge, how do we conserve that, how do we bring trans people into the discussion at tables, queer people into tables and discussion to say, how best do we deal with these situations? If there is a shortage of food, how then do we provide basic necessities, shelter, and all that towards the community? But instead of turning it against them to say they are the reason we are receiving all these mishappenings in the country. Thank you.
Pinty, while you're there, I do want to ask you one more thing. Could you actually talk a little bit more about Eswatini and the issues, the specific issues, climate issues that are facing your community there?
Okay, I would just think over the years, the climate has been really changing in the country from um, the rains we are used to, normal rains in summer, and we are kind of experiencing more rains in towards winter now, and that has affected how the production of food in the country. And in a country, most families rely on self-sustenance, on agriculture production. So in that way, it has affected our food production, which has also caused layoffs, or rather a shortage of jobs in factories, because people can't be employed, people can't get to go to work because there is either a shortage of rains or more rains that causes less food production. And that way, people are losing their jobs. In the process of losing their jobs, we have seen that some of the queer people who are in factories end up being
Oh, Pinty's frozen. I apologize. Let me
the
ask another
family sees you
question.
as a useless person, because by
Oh.
the time you were of use, you were providing the financial basics, you were of help in the family, because in my space, in our country, you just have to have the financial muscle for community to see you as important as the next person. If there is enough financial muscle, then of course people see you as just as useless as any other thing. So for them to consider you an important person or somebody that gives back to community, you have to have a certain level of status. You have to be somebody who is financially able to provide for your families and all that. So when the financial thing is over, or it cancels out because you have no job, then there's an increase of stigma and discrimination, intimate partner violence, mental health issues are on the rise. And the sad thing about mental health is we are a society that doesn't even believe much in psychosocial support. We believe that psychosocial support is something that should be given to people who are actually not insane. We don't believe that it can just be a condition that everyone needs when they undergo a stressful condition or scenario. So we believe it to be that case. And coming to trans people, you could also speak of gender dysphoria. It's associated with mental health. It can be associated with madness in a country. And being queer, just LGBTIQ plus, it can be cut off and put under people who need to go to the psychiatric center for therapy. It's not taken as something that everyone needs on a basis of certain conditions that they go through. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you very much. And certainly we talk about the LGBTQ community, but I think that no one is feeling the impacts of discrimination, especially right now, more so than the trans community. And that's something that's not lost on me. We have another question in the chat, and this is from from Adama. So we talked about imagining your safe space, but this one is a little more rooted in, what's really happening right now. And Adama asked this: the healing process for mental health is collective. What are some tools that work for the panel? I would say, Lina, we haven't heard from you in a while. Maybe you would like to take that one.
Sure, I'm happy to take the question. I'm also reflecting on what the other panelists have shared. And so the thing that Pinty shared about LGBT queer people being blamed for disasters, that is something that we hear as well here in Guyana and the Caribbean. And so that's why sometimes, as a queer person who is also a climate justice person, I like to make the point that the climate crisis affects everyone. It's not just queer people who are affected. And if we had that much power to cause it, maybe we would exempt ourselves from the suffering. So it's a ridiculous statement, but so is a lot of what, people say. But there's also a point that Pinty made about class, which I think, so when we talk about the queer community, it's not a monolith, right? There's a lot of difference within the community and economic power. There is a lot of stratification, those who have more. And for everybody, in this extractive capitalist system that we live in, the more economic power you have, the better off, in a way, you have more choices and so on and so forth. So even in the queer community, the same thing exists. And the point that, mental health is related to our economic well-being, our physical health as well. So when we are not able to eat, we're not able to afford fruits and vegetables, which are part of a diet that keep our body healthy, our mind is also affected. When we're stressing about not having enough money for daily life necessities, right? Stress affects physical and mental well-being. It affects how we relate to people. It affects, how we communicate, how effective we can be. So there are multiple layers to this. In terms of so this disaster, like it's absolutely necessary to think of specific climate disasters and making sure that our community is taken care of. But my opinion is that we need to do this across the board all the time. We need to help each other live healthier every day, not only when there's an emergency, right? And so that's the work that I'm trying to do in my small way in my organization. And it's exactly about community building, which is what I think Adama was getting to, right? It's a collective well-being. And yes, the government and the policies and all of that should take us into consideration. I am, of an age where I have spent a lot of time fighting for inclusion, and where I am at now is a more anarchist in thinking, and like they're not going to help us. We need to help ourselves. We need to build our skills, our capacity, and our community so that we can take care of ourselves. And that's the work I'm engaged in. Right now, it's specifically related to farming and growing our own food, because that is like, we need to live, we need to eat every day to live. It's super basic and super important. And so there's a project that we are recruiting participants from, specifically LBQ Guyanese persons, to grow more of our own food, to learn how to do that, so that we can be more food secure. We can also, save money. This could be a job skill for people on another level. Now, I'll say one of the challenge, and it also builds community. You asked earlier, Derick, about how we cope. When I am stressed, I'm upset, I go out in my yard and I go to my plants and get my hands dirty, in the dirt, in the soil. It's immediate well-being, and I know that doesn't work for everybody. Not everybody has a yard. So we're talking containers. You could live in an apartment and still grow something. And there is such a sense of accomplishment in that, right? Yeah, when you see like a seed burst out and germinate, like, I did that, I have power. Like, it's a magical sort of feeling, right? And so it could be small, but it also adds up. So that's one way. There is a challenge because, as people from the Caribbean whose ancestors were forcibly brought to this region to do agricultural work by the colonizers, right? There is a stigma that still remains. A lot of people don't want to get their hands dirty, right? There's like this upward movement. The farther away we get from the soil and dirt, the better off we're doing. That's progress, right? So there's a lot of unlearning. There's a lot of healing that we still need to do, a lot of remembering and reconnecting to land and each other, but starting with connecting to how we feel. Yeah, so I'll stop there. I think there's more to be said. I'll give the space for others.
Sure. I do have some more questions here, but I do want to go to Joleen because I see you nodding your head in agreement. And I'd love to get your thoughts on what Lina just said.
Thank you, Derick. And I want to reflect back on the past questions, especially when it comes to how layered loss is carried, right? And when we talk about the shadow of colonialism, for many Sojius Pacific Islanders, the destruction of land in a second displacement, the first was the colonial imposition of binary gender roles and religious conservatism, and marginalized our our traditional status, and when climate disasters strike, Sojius individuals often face heteronormative erasure, and they may be excluded from the official aid and defines family through a Western lens of turned away from faith-based shelters because we do not have a national evacuation center. So all the shelters are all under the churches. And so that's the reason why we decided to create our own shelter, to do our own shelters to welcome those who are being turned away. And that is the reason why we decided to do our own dignity kit, provide our own dignity kit for all our members. So since 2018, when Cyclone Gita happened, and then that's when we decided to provide our own dignity kits for all our members. So since then we've produced 248 dignity kits every year.
Can you explain what that is, a dignity kit?
Okay, the dignity kit is more your 72 hours dignity kit that we provide for all our members. So when disaster happens, you have food, you have clothing, you have everything. Anything to do with personal hygiene and everything else, water, milk, tea, coffee, everything for your first 72 hours before any help comes in. You already have that in place, right? So, and sometimes when we talk about, the threat to cultural sanctuaries, this is a word that has always been around us, is the solastalgia, is felt acutely as land loss equates to loss of kinship, especially for us here in the kingdom. And because sometimes we lost our land because of families thinking that queers do not have the right to own land. And yet you are the eldest son of the family, but just because you're gay, just because of your sexual orientation, the uncle do not think that, or the family do not think that you don't have the right.
Yeah. And then Pinty actually wanted to chime in, I think, right? Pinty put a question in the chat, or a comment in the chat. And if you're available, if you're able to, I know there's some internet issues, so please chime in if you're able to. Otherwise, I could just read this comment. Pinty says, in Eswatini, queer people cannot acquire land. You need to be married to get land, and queer marriage is not recognized. So to Joleen's point, I mean, that is a prevalent issue worldwide.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's it all comes into where ancestral connections to to their diverse identities to remain visible through oral histories and sacred sites, because we all grew up knowing of our heritage, and it doesn't matter. And this is where we're all confused about, because before Christianity came to our shores, we already had a culture. Okay, we already had something in place that tells you exactly who you are and who inherits what. Until Christianity, I've got nothing against Christianity, because it's the personal vendetta of people who believes in this Christianity defines Christianity in another way, right? So the only way to do this is, okay, let's deal with the law. You know, the laws will always be the number one thing that corrects everything else, instead of people's own personal vendetta and mind thinking. And yeah, go ahead, Derick.
Oh, I was just going to say we have a couple more questions. I'm going to get to Eunice in just a second, but there's a question that just came in that is kind of related to what we were just talking about. Could you suggest some kinder, inclusive words instead of colonist words that we could use daily and teach children and others? And that's kind of a broad question. So, but if anyone has any thoughts about that, that's a thinker. But I found that to be an interesting question. If anyone would like to chime in there, or we can come back to it. Yeah. So, I mean, that's something to think about. Go ahead, Joleen.
Yeah. You know, I really don't know an actual word, but you know, here in Tonga, we use this kind of dialogue. We call it the talanoa, to come up with an actual traditional word to use when it comes to issues like this, and to, you know, that this is in other words, this is our national way of leverage and visibility within our communities, is to sit down together with the leaders and dialogue on rooted into human connection, by engaging our leaders, our government leaders, our officials, and and not only that, but to be able to talk face to face, and how we can turn critiques into allies, ensuring stability is included in the National Disaster Response Health. And when and that is the reason why majority of the time we don't use the Western language, because we're so confused with the Western. I'm sorry to say this, but you know, if we speak in English, these are the words that are in place, right? And if we design it into our own language, you'll be totally confused, because one English word here in Tonga, one English word will mean 100 things in Tongan, you know. So because we're so poor in translation, and you know, it always gives me the idea of, I mean, it brings me back into the way colonialism came over, you know, to our shores. They came and they thought that we were paganism. We were practicing paganism and all that, right? 21st century later, you come back with bikinis. You came and clothed us first because you think that we were naked. We were only wearing tapa and leaves, right? So 21st century later, you come back with the bikini, literally naked, and introduced us to our shores. So tell me, is there any other word that you think that is good enough for us to use? Right? So I'm sorry, if there's nothing else that we can come up with a word, it has to come from the Western world. We can't give you a word that we use. Otherwise, we'll have to give you a Tongan word, and then you'll be more confused.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Lina had something interesting that's in the chat here. Extractive capitalism. Can you talk more about that? That was a really interesting point that you put in the chat.
Yeah, sure. It ties back to, I think, the point about language loss that Joleen just made, and the question that, colonialism really stole a lot from us. It imposed a particular set of ideologies and belief systems, and it erased and forced a lot of indigenous knowledge systems underground, including language, and there's been a lot of loss. And so we know that about colonialism, but we don't sometimes think about what drove the Westerners to go across the oceans of the other countries and people, our ancestors had traveled the seas and the continents before, but they didn't do it in the way that the Western colonizers did, right? It was to control, own, take, and move people around. And the reason they did that, it was capitalist based, right? It was about making money and owning and extracting the resources from the land, right? Setting up these big plantations for rice, for sugar, cocoa, coffee, everything else, and then extracting people from one part of the world and moving them in the millions in horrific conditions to other parts to work the land, to produce crops, which would then be sold and traded for power. And so that's capitalism, the extractive nature of it, and how that was the driver for colonialism, the colonial expansion in the rest of the world, which is what we are still dealing with today. We have, knowledge has been decimated and lost, and we might be independent now, but there's still extractive capitalism and still neo-colonialism going on in all the other the newfangled ways with technology and where things are made and where they're sold, and we are still living in a capitalist system that requires our labor and our time to be extracted and sold to buy products to keep things going. That is the world that we live in. And it's all connected.
Yeah, that made sense. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. We're running out of time. We have like 12 minutes left. So Eunice asked a question that's a different topic here. Question to panel: what services, supports would you want to see from your healthcare providers? And Eunice adds, I work in a large healthcare system on programs that support the LGBTQIA plus community, people that are unhoused, people that live with HIV, and other marginalized communities. And I'm trying to identify effective supports that can be provided specific to climate change for these communities.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's another broad question, a deep question, and if you want to chew on that for a little bit, but if anyone has any immediate thoughts about what services and supports would you want to see from your healthcare providers, especially among the trans community. I mean, Pinty, if you're there, that would be great. Or Joleen, you can jump in here as well.
Sorry, Derick. Can you repeat that question again?
Sure. Basically,
Having-
it's what services and supports would you want to see from your healthcare providers?
Mm. For us, really, is sensitization. Sensitizing the health workers in language, and we're currently we've been asked by our Prime Minister, and this is actually in 2020, when he was still the Lord Speaker of the House, and he asked us to actually translate the SOGI guideline into Tongan language, and that was a struggle. But we were able, after 3 months of dialogue with all our stakeholders and some of the ministries here in Tonga, we were able to translate this. And this was during a time of the pandemic, and I was stuck in Australia for a whole year and a half. So I had to be on Zoom every single day throughout the last, throughout that 3 months in trying to translate this. So after we got it translated, we took it back to Parliament, and then they passed it, and they asked us to work with the Ministry of Internal Affairs to actually put that language into the added to the Family Protection Act. And then from there, we were asked to take that language and that presentation to teach our people. And at the same time, it's, we had to actually sensitize the health workers at the same time with this guideline, because a lot of time when the Ministry of Health talk about sexual orientation, that's all they know. But they don't know when it comes to LGBTIQ. They're totally confused. About all these other gender identities and all that.
Yeah.
So that's the reason why we came up with that, and that's how we sensitized our health workers.
Thank you. And let me just go around the panel here. Pinty, did you want to add anything to that? Because I know you popped up before, but I know that there's some connection issues. So, Em, I see that you chimed in here, and I think, your point is much more foundational. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, yes, it's a difficult thing for me to think about in terms of specific services in a healthcare context because healthcare in and of itself is still so discriminatory in terms of how it's structured in how interactions occur between provider and patient. And I think as healthcare practitioners, we have to think, not we, because I'm not one, healthcare practitioners should be thinking about how they can make their spaces welcoming and inclusive. Because if you offer specific services and the community still doesn't feel welcome in accessing those services, then it's sort of pointless. So I think a good starting point is to assess the practices, see how we can make healthcare spaces more welcoming so LGBTQ people feel a sense of belonging in those spaces and actually want to develop and can develop more positive health-seeking behaviors. Because a big part of the challenge is, and I don't remember who asked the question, but they mentioned HIV, they deal with PLHIVs. And we saw with the most recent, one of the actions that President Trump took was cutting off aid to a lot of these countries, a lot of low-income countries specific to HIV medication and access. And so we want the community to develop maintenance health practices. So because when in the onset of a disaster, we are on the chopping block. And we're very close to the top of that chopping block. And so it becomes very difficult to advocate for services, for support for LGBTQ healthcare, specific healthcare, when countries are reeling from disasters and trying to tighten their purses and build back. So I would say, again, assess the space, see how you can make it inclusive and welcome so LGBTQ people would want to be in those spaces and have positive health-seeking behaviors.
Thank you very much. I've learned so much from all of our panelists, and we only have about 5 minutes left. I appreciate this discussion. This has been amazing, and I think I'm going to turn it back over to Antoine and or unless Pinty, do you want to add anything to that? I don't know if you how you're. Yeah, go ahead. Add a comment before we wrap up
Yeah.
here.
I'm sorry that my network keeps
Okay.
being on and off. I would have said we would like to see more sensitizations too, raising awareness, especially with healthcare workers. We would like more healthcare workers to be trained on legal gender recognition because we see a lot of self-medication which puts trans lives at risk. We would like to see more of trans people getting into the IPPSS study because normally when we have such studies, we actually have trans people counted in or contributing in as men who have sex with men, which erases the whole idea and visibility of trans people because my thinking is they do that intentionally to say we do not have any existence of trans people in the country, whereas they twist that when they want funding to come through the country to say we have trans people in the country. I would also like to see trans-specific funding, or when I say global fund, when they fund the country, they should be funding trans-specific organizations because when they fund any other organization, it doesn't trickle to the trans communities. So it just means to erase trans visibility and existence. Yeah, thank you.
Very well said. Thank you very much. All right, Antoine, over to you.
Thank you very much for moderating this panel, Derick. And I want to be able to thank our panelists, Emme, Joleen, Pinty, and Sherlina or Lina. Thank you guys very much for a very engaging discussion. When revealing a lot of very pertinent information, particularly to our communities. So as we end this panel discussion, we want to give thanks to some of our sponsors for this discussion, but also leading up to the In My Mind conference. We want to thank DBGM, which and the overall parent organization and the Ancestral Institute. We want to thank Housing Works here in New York that provides lots of services to our LGBTQIA plus communities, most of whom are Black and people of color. Church of the Village, which has been a very close partner with us. Gay City News, and of course, we've got Waller Media, which is Derick Waller's company that he is working with. Our Black Gay Diaspora podcast, which is run by Eric Woodby, and it actually covers a lot of international LGBT community members globally. Amida Care, our healthcare, one of the preeminent healthcare providers in New York State, especially for LGBT Black and people of color communities. And Sheps Media, which is the parent company for Gay City News. We want to be able to also provide this. So if those of you on the screen want to take a screenshot of this or take a picture of this, this is information about finding help for our communities. Trevor Project Lifeline, the Veterans Crisis Line, Trans Lifeline, Trans Peer Support, Vets for Warriors, the National Domestic Violence Hotline, the Black Line. And these are all kind of alternatives to 988. So we just want to be able to extend that to you guys and open it to you. So we want to ask you to scan this QR code on your screen and tell us what you thought, what you think about today's discussion, because that helps to inform how we move forward and plan for the gathering in October. So scan the QR code and tell us what you think. All right, and thank you all very much.
Now, do we want to show the video real fast of Anthony?
You could. Yeah, you could.
Do I do it? Is that how...
Welcome.
Yeah, you can go ahead and do it.
All right, I got to figure this out. I didn't know that I was going to be the one. So let me find out where.
So we have a promotional video that we want to share about the In My Mind conference coming up in October. Take a look at it, show it,
All
enjoy
right,
it,
let me see.
and we look forward to welcoming you. Submit your abstracts for the conference, and we look forward to welcoming you in October. Abstract submissions close on May 3rd at midnight, May 31st. So that allows people from around the world to submit their presentations. Those outside of the US who want to present at the conference, if you are unable to travel because you either don't have a visa or because fuel prices, the flights are too expensive, then we would welcome you presenting virtually online.
Okay, here's the video. I hope this works. I'm not super savvy with Zoom, but here we go. It's about 2 minutes long, so not long at all. And this is Anthony Mercedes, who is very much involved in the organization. Here we go.
Conference just isn't a conference that I attend. It's a conference that really is centered around my story and the stories of folks like me. When thinking about the core population that the In My Mind conference is focused around, it's really elevating the voices of our LGBTQIA plus Black and persons of colors and making sure that we are ensuring that we are creating the space for their stories to be elevated. I think a lot of times, and I'll speak for myself, right? A lot of times we enter spaces and we begin to feel like this is maybe how I need to act, or this is maybe how I should be perceived in this space. Smile a little bit more because you'll be received well. And at the In My Mind conference, first as a participant, and now as a participant and a planning committee member, I have to say it's one of the spaces where I felt the safest. I go into this space and yeah, maybe I'm in planning mode, but it immediately changes the moment that Antoine gets on that stage and starts giving those opening remarks. You see how everyone changes in the room. You see the posture shift. There's no longer these societal ways of presenting in a space. People come authentically as themselves. And that's what we ask for. When you sign up to come to the In My Mind conference, bring you. Don't bring anyone else, right? Don't bring any facade. You come as yourself, because one thing that we do at the In My Mind conference is that we welcome that. We welcome that from start to finish, during lunch, during a drag show performance, however best fit, you come as you. And I promise you, the In My Mind conference is the right fit for you.
There you go. All right. That's all from me.
Thank you very much again, Derick, for moderating this panel. We are going to send that video out to all of you here who attended today, just to help promote it, share it with you so that you can share it with others as well, so that they could be inspired to submit an abstract to present or come to the conference in October. So the conference is October 8th at the LGBT Center in New York City. Abstract submissions are deadline is midnight to 31st of May. And the link to submit abstracts is tinyurl.com/IMM26-ab submission. So that's just putting it all out there. And thank you again very much, and talk to you later.